We're here with Dr. Anthony Lambert to talk about culture, communication and society. First question for you is, why study culture, communication and society at Macquarie?
Look, I think it goes back to the beginning of Macquarie, really. Macquarie started in the mid-1960s, and it was, a ferocious time for cultural and social change. And in the middle of that, the university emerged as a pioneering university. So it was asking a lot of questions about, Australian life and the global situation. So culture and communication and society comes to that and really works through those asking questions in really kind of provocative and interesting ways, but ways that advance our ideas about what it means to live in a culture and to communicate both in a local sense and a global sense. At Macquarie, of course, we've got a range of amazing scholars that are internationally recognised. We have, being, I guess, new in comparison to some of the older universities, that differentiates us from older places and structures and even facilities. So we have world-class, new, progressive and changing facilities. We also managed to marry the typical disciplines that you see in older universities with new, forward-thinking and progressive kind of disciplines like cultural studies, communication studies, and the relationship to study of society and media as well. So I would say because we are modern thinking, forward thinking, and I would say because we're a little bit different and a little bit more progressive in terms of our approach and our facilities when it comes to teaching and studying communication and culture.
And you did touch on it, but what is the value of studying culture, communication, society more generally?
Well, I think it's really important that we understand culture, all of us, and it becomes more and more important with the advent of social media and the kind of globalizing impact of digital technologies. We really do have to understand the world that we live in a little bit better, and most of us has to take ownership for the things that we consume and we produce. So we're really focusing on things like personal and community experiences. We're focusing on those larger media events. We're focusing on the practices and performances of our everyday life. We're focusing on relations of power between individuals and societies, between groups as well. So all of these things shape and govern the world we live in a whole range of ways, creatively, legally, institutionally, governmentally. And so we need to kind of have an understanding of that. And that's the primary focus of what we do in culture and communication studies at Macquarie. We start from a really, and it's not necessarily simple, but it's certainly a kind of straightforward teleology about human practices. So practices of meaning making, so let's say practices of signs, practices of the way that we communicate meaning, practices of the self, practices of the way that we actually understand our own subjectivity. That's our identity in relation to the world, in relation to larger institutions, law, school, science, the communities that we belong to, and also social practices. What are the rituals and the behaviours that we use to function as a society, and how can we change those, evolve those, transgress those, interrogate those? So these questions are really important, and if I boil all that down, it kind of becomes self plus meaning equals society, or meaning plus society equals self. There's a kind of triangular yet circular relationship between all of those things that we try to account for. We also do focus on cross-disciplinary studies in communication and cultural studies. So we look at not strict boundaries between what you learn. This is communication studies. This is cultural theory, for example. We look at the way those things are porous, the way they cross over and bleed into each other, but not just those disciplines, but other disciplines too, because everything's cultural, right? Everything's communication, right? So those things are really important in every aspect of our lives. So we try to focus on critical theory, performances, human behaviours, and a whole range of ways that we participate in the world we live in.
Thank you. And you mentioned before that we had some of the leading experts in this field in our staff. How is this field taught by these experts?
Look, it's interesting, and I think it comes back to the idea that communication studies and cultural studies are transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary, so they cross over quite a lot. We have people that are well known for things like post-humanism, that's our relationship between bodies and technologies in our environment, such as our department head, Nicole Anderson. We have experts in biometrics and race studies, such as Joseph Pugliese. We have people who are experts in robotics and performance, such as Yuji Sohn, or people that are experts in environmental humanities, Ian Collinson, experts in the ethics of law, Kate Ross-Manoth, myself, who's working on media and national identity and film and television in the Australian context, Terry Semp's work on social media. So what happens when we put all these people together? What do our courses look like? How does it feel? How does that actually construct a learning environment? You've got people who are at the top of their game teaching us how to really interact with communications technologies and meaning-making practices across the whole landscape of media and society. So our experts generally then try to work on an approach that marries cultural and critical theory with the creative practices involved in performance and the institutional practices involved in government and NGOs and the practices involved in participating in a whole range of different cultural settings. What we want to do is marry theory with practice. That's the kind of bottom line, and that's pretty much at the core of the way in which our experts teach. The way that kind of, pans out across the life of the degree and across our disciplines, we end up with things like visual culture studies, disability studies, digital storytelling, histories of representation, textual analysis. We look at all types of media writing. We look at policy making, and we look at really creative approaches to social problems and cultural ideas and cultural phenomena. Remember before that I said that we focus on cultural events, spectacles if you like. Everything does come through as some kind of cultural event. We're living through a range of cultural events at the moment, and we'll probably chat about that in a minute. But it's really important that we understand a literacy of media and cultural events. So this is what happens when we bring our experts together. We explore topics such as bodies, technologies, film and TV, visual media, architecture, food, writing, performances of all kinds, because in communication and cultural studies, we view all kinds of behaviours as performative or being performances. We look at the environment in particular and our relationship to that too. So human development and the world around us is what we focus on, and our experts come together to make that story work across our courses.
And that leads really well into my next question actually, and a lot of students wonder this, but are there practical components to this field?
Well, you wouldn't think so given what seems to be the initial focus on critical theory and cultural studies in particular, but there are. A lot of our units, in fact at the first year level, have explicit focus on things like digital technologies and digital design, so you will enjoy and explore a lot of those things. Most of the units in communications and cultural studies require you to present, and that presentation process involves using a range of technologies in really creative ways. So that's actually in the learning outcomes for those units. So it's really important that you get a handle on creative responses to real world problems, as I said before. Keep in mind also that our courses enable you to move within and between a range of different subject areas. So you will move into areas such as media, as performance studies, screen production, writing. So you will take up electives, or even as part of your degree, you'll experience units that invariably immerse you in the production context, from performance to writing, screen production, as I've said. So there are a range of different creative options. On top of that, students are often involved in internships or in the PACE program, which is professional and community engagement. So they go off campus and work maybe on set. Maybe they work for a government department. Maybe they work with a club or a leisure group. Maybe they work in a cultural or charity group. Either way, they're always doing something creative or something that focuses their skills in ways that they can use them when they leave the university. And that's really important.
And just elaborating on that, what kind of careers can studies in this field lead to?
There are a range of skills that you get from this. It might sound incredibly broad, but they are quite specific. The research skills that you get and the ability to be media literate, the ability to write and communicate in really concise ways is important. So we see a lot of our students moving into areas of journalism, education, particularly policy writing. We also see them becoming performers as well as writers. So we see them becoming actors, we see them becoming filmmakers, they work in screen production. We have quite a few that have become, television journalists, for example. We have a few that have become writers in a whole range of different areas, but we also see people moving into community work, becoming advocates, for community groups and for different NGOs and even government departments, as I've said before. We see people going back into academia. I have some students that are, kind of nipping at my heels as we speak, because they're really that good. So the ability to communicate and the ability to navigate the cultural landscape via media technologies and via an understanding of human experience is what drives our candidates and takes them into a whole range of social areas.
And given the current changes in the world, where do you think studies of culture and communication fit in?
Look, I think the study of culture and communication is absolutely crucial at this time. We're going through a range of social changes. I mean, COVID-19, for example, the whole range of movements around identity following the death of George Floyd in the US, movements such as Black Lives Matter, Australian Indigenous movements, for example, as well. All of our courses in culture and communication are what I would call humanitarian. I would call them interventionist. You know, they move in and within and around social problems and media events. And in doing so, they have a lot to say about those things. So we can critically analyse them, but a lot of the assessments involved in our courses require people to pose problems, to pose problems and then actually answer those problems, to pose solutions, if you like, as well. In one of our units, Mobile Cultures, we look at ways in which we could use mobile technology to advance particular social movements or to better the lives of people that are in different marginalised groups in society. So at this point in time, when we're asking questions about identity, we're asking questions about our relationship to power, our relationship to the media. You know, here come a group of people that can be advocates, that can be writers, that can be performers, that are speaking to society on a whole range of levels and different platforms and places. So now more than ever, culture and communication is key.